Okay, so here's the thing. I don't know how markets in other cities and states are during the year, but here in Minnesota, our housing market is definitely seasonal. And you may have been following the national news about the housing market, prices, interest rates, etc. But what you need to know is that every city has a completely different market that acts separately from what you see on the news. So how is Minnesota's housing market? And more importantly, what can you expect this coming spring? Stay tuned to find out. What's going on, guys? BrandonArchie here, aka your favorite Minnesota realtor, and in this video I'm going to be explaining the Minnesota housing market, but more importantly talk about what you can expect this coming spring for those of you that are planning on making a move here between now and summer. And make sure to stay to the end of the video where I'm going to be giving you guys 5 tips on what you can do to make your home buying this year as simple as possible. But first, as always, if you're thinking about making a move here, whether it be now or next year, then shoot me an email at BrandonArchie@kw.com so that we can schedule some time to talk about what it is you're looking for and put together a plan to make your move as smooth as possible. And after I drop some of this knowledge on you, if you find this video helpful, then please don't forget to hit that like button and also consider subscribing. Now, let's get started. Okay, so just as Minnesota has all 4 seasons, we also have 4 distinctive parts to our housing market. And if you look at this graph here that shows our median sales price, you can see that for the most part, it does about the same exact thing every single year. Now, prices hit their lows around December and January, and then they start to creep up late February when the spring market officially starts. Then median sales price tends to hit its peak in June, flattens out in July, and then gradually starts to go down throughout the rest of the year until the entire cycle starts again in January. Now, the reason why this is so important to know is because if you know this, then you can somewhat time the market. And the reason why I say somewhat time the market is because you'll never be able to completely time it, no matter how much of an expert you are, because things that may be unforeseen can happen. Take the pandemic, for instance. Minnesota was on lockdown in April, so in that instance, prices actually hit their peak in September instead of June. Or when the feds raised interest rates, that also slowed the market way down as well. Which brings me to this coming spring market. So the last couple months of the year in 2023, rates were hovering at around 8%. Now, when you combine that with the median sales price in the Twin Cities of $368,000, you're talking about almost a $3,000 a month payment. That almost completely stopped buyer activity altogether. But now, as of January 2024, rates are as low as the low 6s. Now, just that decrease alone means an instant $300 to $400 a month or more decrease on your monthly mortgage, which compared to what it would have been a couple months ago, that's pretty good. On top of that, Fed's already announced that they're going to continue dropping rates throughout this year, which sounds like great news. Now, why is this important to talk about? Well, because there already been reports that mortgage applications this year have already gone up 10%. Now, buyers are starting to recognize that this is a great time to buy, so that they're starting their search early ahead of the spring market, which typically starts around the end of February to early March. Now, the other indication that activity is picking up early is that in December of 2023, where sales typically flatten out or even decline, is that not only did median sales price rise in December, but so did new listings. Now, when rates were hovering at around 7.5%, that was one of the best times you could have bought, because that means there wasn't that much competition on the homes and homes were sitting on the market much longer. Buyers were actually getting seller concessions like price reductions and even getting sellers to pay closing costs. Judging by the data over the last 60 days, I think it's safe to say that we're due for a pretty competitive spring market. Now, realistically, this isn't cause for concern because spring market being super competitive isn't anything new at this point. Now, this has been like this year after year, so it's pretty much something that you can expect from now on. But even still, there are ways to make buying a home in a competitive market much easier. And right now, I'm going to give you guys my 5 tips on how you can do that. Okay, so tip number 1 is start early, especially if you're moving here from another state, because buying a home is already a process in itself. And when you add moving here from across the country to it, that just adds another layer of logistics as well, which is why I always suggest having a phone call with me to put together a plan that fits your timeline without having to rush into everything. Also, here in Minnesota, the home buying process, meaning from the time that you put in an offer to the time that you actually have to make your first mortgage payment, is about 3 months. So as an example, if I put in an offer on a home on February 1st, closings in Minnesota typically happen 30 to 40 days later, with your first mortgage payment not being due until 2 months after the month you closed in. So in the example that I just used, where the closing would happen in mid-March, would mean that your first mortgage payment actually wouldn't even be due until May 1st, even though you put the offer in all the way back in February. Now, the reason why I bring this example up is because most people really don't realize how soon they can actually start the home buying process without having to worry about that first mortgage payment. Now, earlier in the video, I mentioned that June is typically when prices hit their peak here in Minnesota for the year. So if you're someone who wants to be in their new home by June, then you really want to start looking for a home sometime in March. Not only is doing so going to give you plenty of time to find something without having to rush, but you're also going to be able to find a home while prices are still lower. Tip number 2 is consider new construction. Now, I understand that new construction isn't going to be in everyone's budget, but if it is a possibility for you, then I would highly consider it. Now, obviously, a big benefit to new construction is that, well, it's new. But some other benefits that people don't think about is that because it's a new home, that you don't have to go through all the bidding wars like you would if you were to look for an existing home. And when I say new construction, I'm not only talking about building a home from the ground up, I'm actually talking about spec homes in new communities that have already been built and are move-in ready. Now, another benefit to new construction is that the fact that most builders offer incentives to buy their homes, such as reduced interest rates or money towards closing costs. So again, depending on your price point, in some cases, new construction can actually come out being even cheaper than buying an existing home. Tip number 3 is be flexible. Now, in a market like this where there are more buyers and not enough sellers, sellers are pretty much in control. And what sellers are looking for the most when they're looking at offers is the offer with the least amount of contingencies. Meaning they want the one that's going to get them the most money, but they also want the offer that has the least chance of falling through. Now, you'll have to be prepared to offer things that will make your offer look better in sellers' eyes. For example, offering more earnest money, quicker closing date, or even a non-contingent home inspection. Now, keep these things in mind because when you're in a multiple offer situation, it's almost guaranteed that someone else is going to be doing all of those things. So if you want to stay competitive, you'll have to be prepared beforehand. Also, by being flexible, I'm also referring to your search criteria. The tighter your search criteria is, the harder it is going to be to find what you're looking for. Now, put together a list of your must-haves and leave some wiggle room for everything else. You'll find buying a home to be much easier that way. Now, tip number 4 is one that I use quite frequently when I'm working with clients, especially in competitive markets, and that's for looking at homes that have been on the market for a while. Now, in a competitive market, a while could mean just a couple weeks. Now, the most common misconception is that when a home has been sitting on the market for a while, even though everything else is selling, is that something obviously must be wrong with it. But realistically, that's not always the case. And I would say that 99% of the time, something isn't selling because it's overpriced. Now, the best thing about looking for homes like this is that they'll more than likely be willing to offer some kind of incentive, like a price reduction or money towards closing costs, just to get it sold. So if you see something that's been on the market for a few weeks, don't automatically write it off because it could be your diamond in the rough. All right, now this last one is probably the most important one, at least in my opinion, on this entire list, and that is be patient. Now, this one is the one that I don't think gets talked about enough. When you're trying to find a home in such a highly competitive market, it's very, very easy to get frustrated, especially if you're constantly losing out on offers. Now, even when I bought my home 5 years ago, I started getting frustrated and actually stopped looking at homes altogether for an entire month, because I'm a sore loser. But now that I know better, I know that whenever you lose out on one, a better one pops up later. The right home always comes when the time is right, so it's important not to get flustered when you miss out on an offer. Now, part of what I do when we do miss out on one is I always get feedback from the other agent to find out why we didn't. That way we can make adjustments on the next one. But luckily for you guys, I don't miss out on offers too often.